Hey there, FakeFox here. Merry Christmas everyone and welcome to my Nightblade dungeon healer build for Firesong. I absolutely fell in love with Nightblade healer in Trials, and since I've been doing a lot of dungeon trifectas lately, I really wanted to adapt this ultimate-based full healer playstyle for dungeons. And I think I found a unique and powerful build that I will show you in this video. So let's get started with the sets right away. What you would commonly see in Trials would be Spellpower Cure and Pillager's Profit. There's no way around SPC for this build, so we are keeping that, but for the second set I came up with Arkasis Genius. We are wearing Spellpower Cure only on our healing staff and Arkasis only on our destruction staff. By doing so we create space for Pearls of Elnathay and also a monster set. I primarily switch between Symphony of Blades when my group needs resources, or otherwise Magma Incarnate. But there are other good support monster sets as well. With this configuration, we actually have one unused armor slot. We can either fill it up with one piece of Trainee or with Arkasis, so we keep the 4-piece bonus on both bars. In some encounters that depend on burst damage, I like to replace Arkasis with Master Architect. Other alternatives would also be War Machine, Roaring Opportunist, Sexy Old Champion, Pillager's Profit, or Drake's Rush, for example. Since we are combining a light and a heavy armor set, it is important that we use Arkasis jewelry and also a light monster set, so we keep 5 or 6 pieces of light armor. We ideally want to have the heavy pieces on the chest and legs, as those give a bit more armor. Continuing with the traits and enchantments, you might find it easier to survive with a bit more stamina. For that, you can use Infused Prismatic on the head, chest and legs. Otherwise, everything should just be Divines of Magicka. On the jewelry, we want to be running 2 times Infused with Potion Speed. Arkasis Genius has a 30-second cooldown, so we only need 2 to match that. The third one can then be Infused or Arcane with Magicka Regeneration. On the healing staff, we are using Decisive to generate even more ultimate. On our back bar, we are then using Infused. Depending on what the tank is using, we can go for Crusher, Weakening or Lightning enchantment on the back bar. On the front bar, we then run Berserker. My default is usually a Lightning enchantment on the back bar, as it's the least situational, but it's also kind of the weakest. As our Mundus, we can use Ritual, since we deal basically no damage anyway with a full healing build. If you are changing to DD or off healer sometimes, for example in trash fights, you should go for Thief instead. Depending on what enchantments or buff food you exactly use, you might want to put a few attribute points into health, otherwise just put everything into Magicka. You should aim for anywhere between 22k to 25k health. You will absolutely need Magicka recovery on your food. You might be good with Magicka recovery and health. Otherwise use Magicka and Magicka recovery instead. For playing with Pearls of Elnathay, having more sustain and just dumping Magicka with expensive skills is generally better than risking to run dry. You want to be able to keep up your healing, and the more you cast, the more ultimate you also generate. As potions, we can run Essence of Spellpower if we need the buffs, otherwise try Restoration potions are really good, since we can also utilize the stamina for healing. But in a lot of content, Essence of Magicka is completely fine. Being a full healer and also having the reduced potion cooldown, it makes barely a difference. The main reason we drink potions is to generate ultimate, with our class passives and also Arkasis. Because of that, it is very important that we are on our back bar every time we drink a potion. For the race, I recommend Breton the most. When Magicka sustain is an issue, which it is for this build as well as for Nightblade healer in general, Breton's racial passives have incredible value. If you are also playing this character as a DD though, Altmer, Dunmer or Khajiit should be better choices for you. Moving on with the champion points. As always, green CP doesn't matter, except for Seed's Blessing, which I would highly recommend. You will be pretty much non-stop casting, even in between encounters, so you will need all the movement speed you can get. In the blue CP, I recommend Swift Renewal, Soothing Tide, and Livening Overflow and From the Brink. I also tried out Hope Infusion, as it would give even more ultimate, but the uptime always just absolutely sucked. For the recipe, I generally recommend Celerity. Expert Evasion and Slippery are also really good since we are using stamina to heal. Situationally, stuff like Bracing Anchor or Sustained by Suffering can work, but more generally I would just fill up the remaining slots with Boundless Vitality, Ironclad and or Rejuvenation. In the next section, we will go over all the abilities. First of all, we need to play one Siphoning skill. Casting it once every 4 seconds gives us 2 ultimate, and it also gives really good passives in general. For boss encounters, I mostly use Healthy Offering, as it's a pretty decent burst heal and also gives permanent Minor Mending, which is pretty useful. But Funnel Health can also be an alternative if the healing power just isn't needed. In trash fights, I recommend Power Extraction for the Minor Cowardice, or if you actually want to deal damage in trash fights, use Sap Essence, since it's a Magicka skill and therefore easier to sustain. We also need one Assassination skill to give the group minor savagery. The best option, in my opinion, is to backbar Phantasmal Escape if we can utilize the damage reduction, or otherwise do the same with Merciless Resolve, which we only sought for the passives though. We activate it once, stack it up, and just let it be. Don't actually fire the bow. Another option is to slot Incapacitating Strike, but for this build I personally like having the 2 ultimates to choose from, so I don't do that. Then quickly going over the rest of the abilities. As my healing over time abilities on my front bar, I use Refreshing Path, Radiating Regeneration, though you could also use Healing Springs, it's essentially personal preference, and then Echoing Vigor. Having a stamina healing skill is really nice for Pearls of Elnathay, and Vigor also is just really strong. And last front bar skill then is Combat Prayer as the main burst heal, Magicka Dump since it's the most expensive ability, and of course also to keep up Minor Berserk. On the back bar, I run Blockade to proc my enchantment, Energy Orb for the combustion synergy, Elemental Drain for Minor Magicka Steel. I generally recommend having a Minor Magicka Steel ability in dungeons, as the uptime otherwise tends to be really inconsistent, and even if the DDs don't need it, it's really nice for this build sustain. And lastly, I usually have Blood Altar, but if you need another skill slot, that is what you want to replace, as it is not really that important. And as ultimates, I run Barrier and Warren. As I already said, I actually use both on this build, depending on what I need. Let's also quickly go over the passives. We of course want all our class passives, Healing and Destruction Staff, Light and Heavy Armor, potentially parts of Medium Armor if you use alternative sets, then Undaunted, Magicka 8 from Alliance War, Racial passives, and lastly Medicinal use from Alchemy. Now to the rotation. The goal is to constantly keep the Magicka below 30% while also casting as much healing as possible. We don't want to run completely dry. If we cannot cast on global cooldown, we generate less ultimate, and it's also really risky if we cannot react to incoming damage. But we also want to quickly get below 30% again if we somehow regenerate too much. To achieve that, we need to play pretty dynamically and utilize the different ability costs. So here's how I balance my sustain and prioritize my skills. I use Combat Prayer to lower my Magicka as it's my most expensive skill, my Magicka based HOTS to keep it consistent and generate ultimate, and Vigor if I drop too low. I try to keep up everything as consistently as possible by keeping an eye on the timers, but it mostly happens on its own because I can just overcast my healing so much anyway, because it generates ultimate. We also want to be casting our Siphoning skill every 4 seconds if possible. We should avoid overcasting our backbar skills since they generate less or even no ultimate. That's why I try to find abilities with similar and relatively long durations. We also want to continue casting in between fights, so we start with under 30% right away. You can utilize that to pre-buff your healing, or otherwise just spam Combat Prayer. Let's also briefly talk about ultimate usage. It's mostly not worthwhile holding on to the ultimate with this build. We get nothing out of going over 250 ultimate points, at least with Arkasis Genius. So if we just use our ultimate, even if it's not optimal, we start building up the next one quicker and generally get more value out of it. We also don't want to delay our potions, even if we don't need them right now, because we still generate ultimate for our team. In terms of which ultimate to use, my default is Warren to increase damage, and if I feel like the additional safety is needed, I go for a Barrier instead. I also like to just use Barrier during damage stops. It lasts 30 seconds after all, so it's fine to already use quite a bit before a dangerous mechanic, and that way I might already have a Warhorn ready again when the damage is needed. So we are at the end of this build video now. I hope especially the rotation explanation was understandable. It is kind of a strange thing to explain. But anyways, if you need any additional help, feel free to ask me everything in the comments. A build summary is also in the description, together with a few useful links. Thanks for watching and see you.